Hello, welcome back to another Stitches and Scribbles video. Today we're going to be talking about a joining method for our squares on the TikTok patchwork cardigan. So, I'm not going to show every single piece in this video. We're going to do the final construction in the next one, as well as the final ribbing and edging. So what you're going to need for this part of the video to start with is your diagram of your patch placement. I've had mine ready since the first video because that's what I use to plan out how many different stitches I needed and how many different colors I needed. So what you're going to want to do between this video and the next video is make all of your big pieces. So the back, the two front panels, and the two sleeves, and then we'll put this situation together in the next one. So I'm starting with my back diagram, and I'm going to be starting with one of my gray squares and one of my blue squares. So you guys will remember that I have two different stitches for each color represented. So if it helps you to lay them all out and put it together that way, that's great. What I'm really making sure to do is keeping the same stitches away from each other. So like if this one is my half double crochet, then I would use my single crochet for this gray square and then half double and single again, just to kind of space out stitches that look identical. But the color placement is what's really more important. So let's get started. I'm going to start with these two first squares as I just said, which for me means that I'm starting with a half double crochet and a Tunisian simple stitch. So I know that once you put your squares together, they might look a little bit funky because some stitches stretch more than others, but once you put the whole cardigan together, it's really going to look fine. So even though my Tunisian square especially looks really tiny because it's really tight, it'll all work out just fine. The other thing that I have is some extra yarn in one of the two colors that I am using. And I also have a yarn needle. Regular needle popped out there with it. A yarn needle. You're going to go ahead and thread your yarn needle. And today we're doing something called the mattress stitch to join. You can obviously pick a different joining method if you want. This is just the one that I use. I also have a slip knot at the end of my string. If you left your ends long enough to use them as the sewing string, that's fine. I just happened to not remember to do that on these two particular squares, although I think I did later on. I'm starting by just pulling my string through the bottom corners of both pieces, and I'm going to loop it through that slip knot I made, pull the slip knot tight, and this is going to keep my string attached. If you have stitch markers or safety pins and you're worried about spacing out your squares, I recommend placing them in the middle, at the far end, and then in between as needed if you are worried about that. I'm just going to go ahead and do mine because I've done this before and I can see what I'm doing. So we're basically alternating between inserting into one square. So I started with the blue, and then inserting into the gray. And because in this particular example we used multiple stitches, it's not going to be a 1-to-1 ratio of one blue stitch to one gray stitch. You're going to kind of have to eyeball it and do it where it fits best. And you just keep doing that, and what it's going to do is kind of create a ladder in between that you can pull tight once you're done, and that'll make the stitch invisible. You won't be able to see it. So you could even do it in a different yarn color if you wished, although I wouldn't recommend that just in case. So I'm going to keep alternating sides, pulling tight a little bit as I go just to check that everything is working as intended. And every so often I also check the length I have left just to make sure that I am still on track. Because my gray square happens to be the stretchier one, I'm kind of scrunching that one over as I sew so that I use up more length than I am on the blue side. Again, just pulling tight every so often to check that I'm on track. On the double crochet or half double crochet side, I'm even going through multiple loops to give it some extra stability. If you happen to do squares that are all the same stitch, you may be able to count it off a little bit more than I am. I kind of have to eyeball it because these two stitches are so different. But you can do what works best for your piece and the stitches that you chose. I love using this mattress stitch because it creates such a neat seam with very few gaps. Once you get to the end, you can pull that seam tight as much as you can without distorting the fabric. I'll loosen it a little bit actually just to make sure everything is correct. And then I'm actually just going to cut it and tie it off with one of the other ends that happens to be right here. If there isn't an end right there for you to use, you can always just tie it off with a knot using the string you used to sew. And that's it for sewing a seam together. Going back to our diagram for just a minute. What I would recommend doing when you're doing the seams is to create rows of squares. So if I'm doing the back, I would make my top row, second, third, fourth, fifth, etc. And then seam the whole row together. So if I'm doing the first row, I would have a seam here, and then here, and then here, and then I've made a row of 4. Once I've made a second row of 4, I can do one long seam right here. And that just kind of cuts down on your seaming time because you're not going to be doing one individual one in every single direction. You'll have those longer seams as you go. So that's it for this video. I hope you enjoyed learning the mattress stitch, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!